We're going to bring Barrington Dyer up, speaking about blockchain and IP law.
So a little bit of background. I'm a litigator, and what I mostly litigate is intellectual property and technology transaction disputes, mostly in the software and computer space. Much of what I do, or most of the time when I get involved with companies, it's because there's a dispute, either because some technology has been misappropriated, some technology has been infringed, or a technology partner has broken an agreement. And it's also the flip side of that. I also represent companies when they've been accused of misappropriating or infringing technology or breaching an agreement. And I like to think that I'm always on the right side of that dispute. Anyhow, in addition to that, when I'm not litigating, I do a fair amount of work with emerging companies, early stage companies, helping them to develop IP plans and IP strategies. So what I'm going to talk about today are the sorts of IP that you might be generating if you're a blockchain startup or ICO. And if you're an investor, this is also relevant because these are the sorts of things that you want to be looking at if you're doing your due diligence to see the health and how organized a company is. So first off, IP is often associated with patents and copyrights and trademarks, but it's actually a lot more than that. And it actually begins with something as simple as filing a domain, getting your domain name. And if you're a blockchain company or an ICO, it's probably the first thing you do. The one thing I'll say about that, though, is you also want to consider registering the variations and alternative versions of your name. If any of you have ever seen, what's his name, not Jon Stewart, but John Oliver has a show on HBO, and one of his gags is registering domain names of politicians and companies and then using them for his own humorous purposes. And that's a funny example. But if you're a company, you definitely want to make sure that if you have the ability to register multiple domain names, you want to do that. Otherwise, you're giving other people the opportunity to free ride on your name. It always amazes me, for example, that Bitcoin.org didn't also register Bitcoin.com. It's owned by some guy in the Cayman Islands. And I'm sure he gets tons of traffic just because he's got Bitcoin.com, and there's lots of people that confuse that with Bitcoin.org. Next, it's social media accounts. Anything that you are currently using or maybe using to connect with customers, you want to make sure that you get those early on. You want the names that are associated with your brand. So things like Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Pinterest, any type of social media account, that has value because that's going to be associated with your company and name. And it's relatively easy to do, right? After that, confidential information, you want to make sure that if you have business information that's non-public, that you're protecting that. And a subset of that is trade secrets, and we'll get into that. Next is data. And this one's often overlooked, but if you think about it, some of the most valuable companies in the world today, their valuations are based off their data. And so you want to make sure that you're taking measures, if you're collecting data, to protect that data. And then after that, we go into the more traditional forms of IP you would expect. And those include, of course, copyrights, patents, and trademarks. So why protect IP, right? Well, first off, it's an asset, right? And you can use that for a variety of purposes that can benefit your business, one of which is securing investment, securing financing. The other, of course, is to protect your company. You can protect your brand. You can protect your goodwill. And it also, quite frankly, keeps people from just ripping off your business model, especially in something like fintech. It's really important that you have something that can separate you from the rest of the herd. And so you want to make sure that you're taking the correct measures to do that. And so, from the beginning, you want to make sure that you have an IP plan. And that begins by asking some very simple questions. Do you have an IP policy in place? And if you don't, well, why not? Do you have your employees sign IP assignment agreements? And if not, again, why not? And is the IP assigned to the company? If you're a really early stage company, you're just a couple co-founders, most of your IP is probably in the name of the co-founders. But once you start bringing people on board, you want to start to formalize things, right? You filed your LLC or your S Corp or whatever it is. The asset should be in the name of the company, because that's the entity that you're operating under. And then the last point on this is you want to make sure that you're protecting confidential information. This is probably the easiest thing you can do as a business. If you generate information that is non-public, that gives you some sort of an advantage, a business advantage, you should treat that information as confidential. And simply by having things like employee agreements where employees acknowledge that certain information is confidential, limiting access to that information, and using NDAs when necessary when engaging with other companies. These are all ways that you can use to make sure that your confidential information is protected. And so that'll launch us right into employee agreements, which I think is often overlooked. It's a major component of any IP plan. First off the top, if you have employees, they should be signing an IP assignment. And that includes everything. That includes inventions, it includes work product, it includes media, quite frankly. Anything that they're generating in the course of their work, that should be assigned to the company. You also want your employees to acknowledge your IP policy, assuming you have one, which I encourage you to make one. But employees should be aware of what your policy is with respect to IP. They should also sign a confidential information agreement, basically acknowledging that they understand that they have an obligation to protect confidential information, and also to the best you can describe the instances in which information should be treated as confidential and when information does need to be treated as confidential. And the last point I'll make on this is that all these same standards apply to contractors and freelancers. If you hire someone to write code for you, take photos for you, do literally anything, if it's front end, it's back end, they need to assign that work to you. They need to assign it to the company. That work product, whatever it is, that needs to be assigned to the entity that's contracted them. And if they have access to information that's non-public, if they have access to your confidential code or whatever it is that you do, then there should be a confidentiality agreement in place about that. As I mentioned before, data protection is can be extremely important because data can be valuable. And there's really three ways that you can protect data. The number one way, and probably the broadest way, is through contract. And what that means is if you have data and you share it with anyone, you need to share it either through a license, a joint venture, or a terms of use. There needs to be some types of contractual agreement in place about what are the terms under which that other party or other person is allowed to access your data. If you don't have that, then you're not going to have any contractual protection. The second way you can protect data, of course, is through trade secret. Assuming the information is non-public information, then you may have some protection there. And then the final way is through copyright. But what I'll say about that is protection for data through copyright is extremely limited because copyright really protects expression. And so all you can really protect with copyright is a database, and only in limited circumstances. There usually has to be some type of selection or coordination involved in the database. And so you have very minimal protection under copyright. Sorry, under very minimal protection of data through copyright. And so transitioning to copyright protection, the main point here is, or the main I think that what most people are talking about is the open source issue. So as many of you know, pretty much all the blockchain platforms today are open source. The only real difference is, is the platform under a restrictive license or is it under a permissive license? If you're developing for Ethereum, you're developing under a restrictive license, or what's commonly referred to as GPL, a general public license. And what that means is, if you develop using Ethereum and then you make improvements and you put that code out there, you're required to license that code to others. You can't restrict the license, you can't charge for it. Bitcoin and Hyperledger Fabric, on the other hand, are under a permissive license, which means if you make improvements to the code, if you make modifications to it, you can choose how you want to distribute and license those improvements. But what I will say is that there's other forms of expression beyond just the code that you want to consider. And these include things like your website, your white paper, and of course, media. How many people here have heard of CryptoKitties? Excellent. How many people actually own CryptoKitties? Bravo, bravo. So just, quick background, CryptoKitties is a decentralized app by Axiom Zen. Very cool idea. They basically took the Tamagotchi idea, put it on the blockchain. What's interesting about CryptoKitties, though, when you buy a CryptoKitty, you own the CryptoKitty, you own the kitty's DNA, but you actually don't own the artwork. Axiom Zen still owns the artwork, and for good reason, right? They've developed a brand and they want to be able to do other things with it. And so that's an instance where they've created a model where they're selling you the token of the CryptoKitty, but they still own the artwork to that kitty. A few points on patent protection. Again, I won't go too much into about the debate about whether blockchain should be patentable or shouldn't be patentable. The reality is that there are people filing patents and there are patents being issued. But what I would say is that, again, it's a transferable asset. And you can use it for a variety of business purposes, including raising venture money or whatever. In addition, it's proof that you own some technology. And so, again, if you're trying to distinguish yourself in the market, especially in the fintech space, if you have some patents behind you, that's a distinguishing factor. It can also serve a defensive purpose. If you're not looking to license your patented technology, or if you're not looking to monetize your patent, you can use it to prevent others from potentially suing you. Brian Armstrong from Coinbase, I think last year, basically entered into a DPL, defensive patent pledge, where he basically said Coinbase is going to pursue patents, but they're never going to assert them. They'll just use them defensively. And so I think we'll see more of that. I think we'll see more companies continuing to file patents, but just using them for defensive purposes. And then the other point I'll make on this is, more is patentable than you think. I think a lot of people assume that, blockchain and fintech, there's not a lot of patentable subject matter, but I would challenge that notion. Software, business methods, these are things that are still patentable. The U.S. Patent Office has never said that you can't patent software or that you can't patent a business method. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into getting a patent on software or business method, but certainly you can get protection there. And so just to give a few examples, if you think about what's potentially patentable as a utility patent, here's just a couple of examples of areas where patents may be secured. And it's pretty broad. Includes things like asset management, decentralized apps. Certainly security is a very popular space right now for filing patents in blockchain. If you have some interesting technology around wallets, that could be something. If you have interesting technology around merchant services, all of these things are potential grounds to file patents. And the other point that I'll make on this is it's a first-to-file system. And so, even if you have no interest in ever using the patents for any reason or licensing them, if you develop some technology and someone else after you develops that same technology, but they filed the patent first, they then own that technology. And there could be an unfortunate situation where they assert against you. And so there's an incentive if you develop something to file first. And I just also want to point out, you don't want to forget about design patents. If you have some really interesting technology involving UI or UX, it's worth considering doing a design patent for. And the great thing about design patents, they're relatively inexpensive, and you can get one usually within less than 12 months. And so the turnaround's pretty quick. And this didn't quite work out. I had a build for this one, but the point, this was actually an example of a design patent filed by one of the Winklevoss twins. I think it was Cameron. And this was for their crypto coin trading platform. And so this was an actually issued design patent. And this is just an example to show you that, this is something that can be patented as a design patent. My last subject is going to be trademark. And my only real point on this is if you haven't registered your marks, please do. It's relatively simple, and it's so important. I meet companies all the time that have been operating for months or maybe even a year and haven't registered their name yet. And this was supposed to be a build, but I pulled up just a few of my favorite recent blockchain trademark applications. One of them is New Kids on the Blockchain, obviously channeling some 90s nostalgia there. The other one is the non-blockchain blockchain, which I'm not sure what that would look like, but I'm curious to know. And then blockchain cruise and blockchain adventure. Again, I have no idea what that's going to be, but I'm excited to find out if it ever turns out to be something. And then my favorite one of all is blockchain never sleeps, because I feel like if you're in this space, then you're probably never sleeping.